Constitutionality of the lockdown, is it justified? Has America been irreparably changed? We talk about that and more in episode 239 of the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, and joining me, we have Justin Haskins, editorial director at the Heartland Institute. What's going on, sir?
I'm doing very well, Donald. Very, very well. I still do not have COVID, so that's a good day. Every day without COVID's a good day.
That's right. You do well.
How would you even know? Most people are, I won't say most, many people are asymptomatic. You may have it.
That's a good point. That's a good point. You could be spreading it to everyone every time you go to one of those hamburger stands outside your apartment.
That was one time. The reason I know I don't have it is because I literally don't go anywhere except that one time to the hamburger stand, which I guess is possible that I'm still living that.
So you already obey daddy government by staying home?
Yes. But in fairness, I probably would stay home anyway. So it's really not a big lifestyle change for me, Isaac. I work from home every day for years now. So
yeah, I know. I was saying how like COVID-19 has given me the perfect excuse to do what I want to do most, which is stay at home and watch TV. Chiming in there was Isaac Orr, policy fellow at the Center of the American Experiment. What's going on, sir? You got a MAGA hat on? What are you wearing?
No, it's a Beaver Creek Brewing hat from Webo, Montana. If you're ever on I-94 on the border between Montana and North Dakota, check it out.
Okay, will do. Also joining us, we have Jim Lakely, VP of Heartland, back at home office there. Are you alone? And he's muted.
I'm not.
I
know.
Oh, man.
I'm not alone.
Good here.
I know, as usual. I think I did that last week too.
Yeah, you have your cat with you?
No. My cat is very ill. It's probably maybe the last week for him, but no, it has nothing to do with COVID. It's cancer.
Cat's got COVID.
Kitty cancer, unfortunately. But no, there's another staffer here at Heartland in the office today doing some development work, what we call acknowledgement letters for the wonderful people that donate to this awesome think tank, a 501c3. You also can donate. Go to heartland.org/donate for more.
So, gentlemen, this is the end of week 4 of the.
Wait, hold on, Donald. I have a question. If I donate, will I get a letter?
You will. Yes. Okay. I'll sign it myself, Justin.
Does it have to be a certain amount to get a letter?
Yeah. If I give you guys like 10 cents, do I get a letter?
How funny would it be if we donated 4 cents and they spent more on the postage for the letter and the staff time than they actually
Well, you're not getting a letter, Isaac. So
yeah,
Jim, would I get a letter if I donated?
4 cents? Sure. Why not? I'll sign it myself just because you're my buddy.
All right.
That's going to be a letter written on like a napkin with
in crayon.
Yeah. I'll send it by mule.
You'll get it in 4 to 6 weeks.
No, you won't get it at all because it's snowing in Illinois and that mule will die on the way there. But
that's true.
That's true. There's a good like 4 inches outside. But anyways, gentlemen, this is the end of week 4 of quarantine of shelter in place in Illinois. This is week 5 of me working from home. And you know, as we start to see like the cases trend down and the summer edge even closer, I've ditched the question of asking you guys on a scale of 1 to 10 how nervous you are about the virus itself and started asking you guys of 1 to 10 how antsy are you to kind of get out and get back to normal. Jim?
I am quite antsy to get out and get back to normal. I think I've put on at least 5 pounds since this because my usual exercise routine and playing tennis has been interrupted. So I'm not able to go to the gym. I'm not able to do spin classes. I'm not able to play tennis, and I'm too lazy to just like run around the neighborhood. So I am quite itching to get out there and get life back to some kind of normalcy.
You know, I've heard that. That's kind of like a meme going around that everyone's like putting on weight because they're sitting at home and eating all their quarantine food or whatever. But like Michaela and I, we have been doing like workouts every day. So I think it's quite possible I might be one of the only people that comes out of this in better shape than when it started.
I think a lot of people are stress eating too. It's quite a stressful world we got right now.
I haven't eaten any fast food. We've only been cooking at home. Workouts every day. Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good. My energy levels are up. Isaac, 1 to 10. How you feeling? Antsy?
Today I'm very antsy.
Yeah. I think you said you were down to a 4, where previously you had a 7. So give me a number, man.
5.5.
Man, a few words. All right, Justin Haskins. How about you? You getting Nancy yet? I mean, you work from home regularly, so.
Yeah, no, my lifestyle has probably, if no one told me that COVID existed, if I just never heard of it, no, I mean, things have changed a little bit. The biggest thing I think that has changed for me is that my wife and I we go to a lot of restaurants. Like that's the thing that we do. We do that sometimes 3 or 4 times a week. Like that's our expensive habit. We go out to eat.
You're going to complain about your student loan debt on this podcast.
You're right. I should take all those dollars and put it towards that $500,000 student loan debt.
You should.
That'll really make a big difference in 200 years.
Through less interest.
So, well, yeah.
No wonder you're broke.
Notice the aggression. So I really haven't. My life hasn't changed all that much. Okay. So it's not that bad. I do miss though being able to go to the movies occasionally, which we haven't done in forever. And also,
I have not missed that. As a movie buff, I have not missed that. The theater experience is a nightmare. I would watch so many more new movies if they came straight to streaming, by the way. So I do not miss that.
I do. I miss that, and I miss going to restaurants. So that's really it. I mean, to be honest, I'm very lucky that my job, I can work from home. Actually doing TV interviews, all the TV interviews and stuff, now I can do them from home, which is amazing. And I don't even have to go to a studio to do those things, which was a huge pain. So things are getting better for me in some ways. So,
Justin, you need to check your COVID privilege, man. This is really disgusting, really.
Yeah, it's true. I'm disgusted for you.
So we had a fan email that was scolding us for not talking about the unconstitutionality
because our fans also scold us.
So Coach Mendoza doesn't show up for 8 months, even though we plead with him. And then he says we need to talk about how unconstitutional this is.
No, it wasn't Coach Mendoza. This was that guy, Mike. So he is scolding an appropriate word, Justin? Is that how you would describe the email that we got?
Yeah.
Am I being too rough?
No. I think that's right. I think that he scolded us. I mean, I'm not saying we didn't deserve it necessarily.
Well, I thought we had talked about it a little bit.
I don't know. He says here. Now, granted, the beginning part was all very nice, which I'm skipping over. So I'm not saying the guy trashed us the whole time, but he did say this. He goes, "My purpose, though, is not to fuss, blah, 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 blah. I am disappointed in all of you ITTers. You are supposedly all libertarians, or at least serious small government conservatives. I have listened to the modern monetary talk and the socialism is evil talk and the mistakes of the FDA and CDC. And in this case, but not once in the past several weeks did I hear any of you ever question the government's declaration that the coronavirus was indeed an unprecedented biological threat to the U.S. and the American people that warranted the totalitarian measures the feds and almost all state governors have taken to prohibit businesses from conducting business and to order supposedly free citizens in many states to put themselves under house arrest." And then he says, "Sorry about the run-on sentence. Was a run-on sentence. Thank you for apologizing." And then it goes on and on and on and on and on. So, I mean, several hundred pages long. I mean, several hundred words long. Not pages. Yeah. Feels like pages.
Feels like.
Yeah, feels like.
So I mean, I felt okay. So I guess there was a couple of items that kind of addressed this that we were going to talk about last time, but I really wanted to make last time, considering Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race and there was some good news on the corona front. I wanted to make it more of a good time episode last week. So we're going to talk about some of those things today, I guess. So Jim, do you want to take a whack at it? The constitutionality of this type of a lockdown?
Well, first of all, I want to thank that guy, Mike, for writing us such a long and well thought out letter. It's great to hear from fan.
Oh, yeah. Also, by the way, yeah, agreed. And if you guys do want to send us stuff, email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. You could be in the tank famous like that guy, Mike, if you send us your letters. But go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I mean, he's right, and I would have talked about it last week, and I think we talked about it right after we hit stop on the recording of last week's podcast. So it's good that this was brought up again. This is, well, it's not even technically. It is unconstitutional what has been happening across the country in many, many states. I mean, we just had Easter weekend, the most important and holy day in the Christian calendar. And we had governors sending police out to arrest ministers who were holding services in parking lots with everybody staying in their cars. We had, governors saying that you can't go to church. The governor of New Jersey, Democrat, Riley, I think. I'm sorry, I forgot his name because I just thought to bring it up right now. He was interviewed by Tucker Carlson this week on the show. And Tucker, it was a very respectful and long interview for television. It was like 15 minutes long. And he asked him, it's like, why is it, did you think about the Constitution at all when you decided to ban people from going to church on Easter weekend, during Holy Week? And he goes, well, no, the Constitution didn't really enter into my mind. Well, see, that's the problem. At least he admitted it right out front. And all these people think that this pandemic is justification for taking away all of our rights and basically putting 300 million people under house arrest. People who are healthy, people who are not at high risk of getting COVID-19, people who are, if they get COVID-19, can then quarantine themselves and not get the elderly people in their own families or elderly people outside their families sick. There are many things you can do that are constitutional that would mitigate the problem of COVID-19. And governor after governor has decided, you know what? I'm just going to lock everybody down. I'm going to basically make a police state in my own state and nobody can go anywhere. In the point that Tucker was making with the governor of New Jersey, it's like, okay, so you say that people can't go to church on Easter Sunday because it's too much of a threat. People won't be social distancing enough if they go to church on Easter Sunday. But you can go to the convenience store and stand in line and get lottery tickets if you feel like it. You can go to Home Depot and damn right you can go to the liquor store in New Jersey. And he actually said that there are people out there that are addicted to alcohol, and if you take away suddenly their ability to get alcohol, it's going to cause lots of mental and societal problems in the state of New Jersey. So we have to let people get their drugs, basically get their alcohol. Granted, that would be a concern. But it is not protected in the Constitution that I get to go to the liquor store and get myself a 12-pack of Miller Lite or a fifth of Jack Daniels. It is in the Constitution that I'm allowed to worship as I see fit, and the government cannot prevent me from worshiping as I see fit. So yes, that is just scratching the surface of the unconstitutional lockdowns that are going on state by state.
Well, Jim, let me stop you right there.
It needs to stop. Okay,
go ahead.
I think that booze is less important than Easter Sunday service?
To many people, it is, yeah.
I grew up in Wisconsin. This does not jive well with me, sir.
Well, they have bars at the churches in Wisconsin, don't they? So it actually handles it together.
Yes.
Jim, where do they get the wine for the actual service? You know, when you have to drink the wine?
What about
liquor stores? Liquor stores.
Well, sure.
Liquor stores. Yeah, fine. Yeah, Jim.
I got it.
But really, the Constitution was meant to constrain the power of government, not to enumerate the rights of citizens, right? So the Bill of Rights, if we're going to go back to the real, Federalist v. Anti-Federalist talks that, the Constitution is founded on, really, you have the same constitutional right to go to the liquor store and, get your freak on as you do to worship. It's just not in the Bill of Rights. So, I mean, really, we have to think about it in those terms.
That's a good point.
Okay.
And he's speechless.
Justin. Yeah.
Feel free to add on to that.
Actually, I think that one of the more interesting points that Isaac just alluded to is that if you look originally at the Constitution, originally states had lots of leeway in how they handled things. And you wouldn't have the federal Constitution only protected you from the federal government. It did not protect you from state governments. That's why you have state constitutions. Otherwise, what's the point of a state constitution that says you have a right to bear arms or you have a right to free speech? Just about I think every state constitution says you have a right to free speech. Why? And to free religious expression. Why do they have that? The whole point of it was because there were state powers and they were federal powers, and the federal constitution was meant to protect you from the federal government. That was the whole point. So from a strictly originalist constitutional perspective, states actually have a lot of leeway. However, 2 points to that. Number one, does it violate state constitutions? I think is a key issue, and it probably does in a lot of cases. Unless there's some sort of special emergency powers provision or something in that constitution that says that these things are abrogated. And I don't know of anything like that. Maybe that exists in some state, but I'm not aware of it. The second thing is it becomes really complicated because later on in American history, after the Civil War and all of that, you had the 14th Amendment passed, you had other amendments passed, and essentially Supreme Courts later on, mostly in the 20th century, ruled that certain parts of the federal constitution have to be applied to the states. And where that stops, we don't necessarily know. They haven't actually figured that out entirely, but they have.
And it's always moving.
Yes, it has, and it has gone back and forth a little bit over time. So they haven't even been consistent about it. The Supreme Court is not consistent at all if you look at them historically. But religious liberty is one of the things that the Supreme Court has pretty consistently held, that the First Amendment to the Constitution does apply to the states, meaning the states can't take away your right to worship, even if they pass some sort of law that says that, or even amendment to their own constitution, they can't do it. So where are the specifics here? See, the founding fathers originally imagined that states would make these decisions for themselves. And if you don't want to live in an authoritarian state, then go move someplace else. That was the idea. But over time, that's evaporated away for a variety of different historical reasons. And now we don't know where that stops and where that ends. And now we're left in a place where we're saying, well, this is unconstitutional. Well, maybe, but I don't know. I don't know anymore because it's really confusing. And the way that the Constitution has been applied has been so all over the place that I'm not entirely sure that that's the case. However, again, I do think that in the states that have protections for these things, and again, I think every state has religious liberty protected. I don't know how that complies. I don't know how you can say you have a right to worship freely in your state constitution, but then the governor can just arbitrarily decide that that right doesn't exist. But I don't know that the federal constitution necessarily comes into play. So I think that's kind of an open question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I understand that there are emergency powers that governors and the president himself have collected for themselves, right? But this is I've declared an emergency, and now I can do things that I would normally be able to do under the Constitution. I mean, but what we're seeing in Michigan, where the Governor Whitmer, as Trump, I think, tweeted half Whitmer, which is pretty funny. Yeah, he actually tweeted. I've heard that around, but I think the president himself actually called her half Whitmer. She decrees. She's made so many crazy decrees that her political career. She thinks actually what I think she was doing. Telling people they can't go to church, telling people that they can't even get that HCQ drug, and she instructed all doctors and pharmacists in the state to not prescribe that for COVID-19 because it hasn't been proven to be effective. And then 2 days later, the legislature and others ask her to stop that and let them get it in Michigan because they need it to save lives, for crying out loud. She is such a power-hungry person and a tyrant, but she acted this way because she figured, well, I'm on the short list for VP. And acting like a tyrant is the way to get the attention of the hard left in the country and to get Biden's attention. So maybe I'll be VP by doing this. And in response, the people of Michigan marched on Lansing, the capital, the other day to tell her to go pound sand. And I'm glad to have seen it. People need to stand up for their rights. There are emergency powers and things you can take to ensure public health. But we have gone through a bait and switch in this country. We were told that these extraordinary measures where you put the entire country on house arrest, you throw 22 million people out of work. You have more people applying for jobless benefits right now. I think 13% of the labor force has applied for jobless benefits at the height, and that's the most ever by a long shot. The most 1 month span of anybody applying for unemployment benefits in this country in recorded history was in the fall of 1982 during the height of the recession then. And it is by factors of 6 higher than that now. So, you can do some extraordinary things, but it can't last forever. And it's good that people are out there demanding that these things be ratcheted down, be pulled back, that we start to get back to normal. The reason there has not been, frankly, armed conflict when people have had their jobs taken away, had their businesses taken away, been put under house arrest, is because the American people are reasonable. They can be reasoned with. We can be told the truth, and we can take voluntarily measures that will help ensure public health. But this will not go on forever. You cannot. They said it was going to flatten the curve, and it did. But, you know, the idea, and now they're saying that now we have to stay locked down for quote unquote public, to protect public health, to save lives. That's not what this was for. This was to keep the hospitals from being overrun by hundreds and thousands of people that were critically ill instantly. And the hospitals were going to be swamped, overwhelmed, flooded with people that they couldn't handle. We had to avoid that catastrophe. We have avoided it. The Javits Center in New York City has been converted into a field hospital. It is not nearly remotely full. The USS Comfort came into New York Harbor to handle other patients that needed health care so that the hospitals would be free to treat people with COVID-19. That, I think, at its peak was 1/3 full. This, we have won. We have beat the don't swamp the hospitals game. We've won. Now we have to start letting people get back to their lives, let these businesses open. The economic devastation is absolutely incalculable, and the violations of our rights as Americans, this cannot continue, and people should not let it continue. There needs to be more pushback and protests. I hope we will see more of them.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of makes me think of something that Isaac, that you've talked about in the past in terms of environmental regulations, and how it's basically like people will accept those regulations if A, like they can, like economically, and
Yep.
two, if they see the justification in doing so. So it's like when we were talking at the very beginning of this, of like, you know, potentially like millions of people dying from this in the country. I think people were willing to accept, yeah, let's shut stuff down. Absolutely. But now that we're kind of seeing the trend going a lot lower and almost being on par with like a bad flu season. So, I mean, what do you have to say about that idea?
Oh, absolutely. The cost benefit that we were told about earlier is no longer what we're seeing on the ground. So, you know, in Minnesota, especially, the governor is using a model by the U of M, which is projecting something insane, like 22,000 deaths in the state over the next 18 months. And that's more than what we're talking about. Well, it's like 1/3 of what we're talking about on a whole national level. Yeah. So the cost benefit for this is totally wrong. And, you know, if I thought that the rules here were being more narrowly tailored, if they were, you know, reflecting the risk that we probably actually face, I think I'd be a lot more inclined to be supportive of some of the measures that are, you know, being done right now. But like, I just feel like this is what they think they should do, and they're going to use whatever means necessary to justify it. And that's a lot of times what people do with environmental policy. Like when we look at the Clean Power Plan, or we look at the mercury and air toxic standards, they use all this, like, basically they would use all of these like confounding factors, or I forget what they call it specifically, but instead of looking at, okay, how much mercury are we emitting right now, and what is this rule going to cost, they would look at like particulate matter, even though we already meet all the standards for particulate matter throughout the country. So, or most places do. I'm not going to say every place does. So like the models that they use to project cost are wrong, and as a result they prescribe things that are actually damaging to the economy.
Yeah, and Justin, you and I have had several conversations about this type of stuff over the last few weeks, and like considering that like the normal flu season has like a mortality rate of 0.1, like a bad flu season could have a mortality rate of 0.2, and there's data coming out of Germany that's suggesting that the mortality rate of COVID could be as low as 0.4, and that's down from like 4% at the onset of this, what they thought was potentially going to be the worst. Now it's down to 0.4. So where's the line at? You know, where's the line at which the government's going to come in and shut off the economy and tell everyone they have to stay at home for months at a time? Because it seems like it's in between 0.2 and 0.4. Like, is that the new standard? Is that the new precedent?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the problem that we have is we don't know what the standard is. No one has any clue what the standard is. We're all wondering what the standard is, and we're trying to figure it out. As I've said Donnie and I have talked about this many times over the past few weeks, but the thing that really bothers me the most about this is we know that people are willing to live in a world where people die, tens of thousands of people die from flu just in the United States every year. We know that because that's the world we've been living in for decades and decades and decades. And that's acceptable and that's fine. And no one even complains about it. That's just reality. So we also know that wherever we're at right now is clearly unacceptable to a large number of people. We can't allow these people to die. And my question is not, is that wrong so much as, can someone please tell me where the line actually is? At what point do we cross over into, well, this is too much of a public health crisis, or this is too many people dying? When did that happen? How did that decision get made? You know, who made that decision? And is it the right decision? I mean, those are all questions that need to be asked. And we're not asking, people are asking those questions now on shows like this, but people generally speaking have just kind of gone along with it and said, yep, this is too much. But where is the line? And the reason why that matters is because if the line is not clearly defined, even if everything that's happening now is justified, and there are people who say it's not, but even if it is, what's to stop the next whatever crisis, whether it's a public health crisis or a climate emergency or whatever, what's to stop that from being unacceptable? Mm-hmm. And who decides whether that's unacceptable? Right. And under what conditions? And then how do we as a population determine that that's the wrong decision? We have to wait for the next election. So if Joe Biden becomes president and says, I'm declaring a climate national emergency because of climate change, and we're all, all these climate models say that there's a chance that 80 years from now, millions of people are going to die, blah, 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 blah. Therefore, it's a climate national emergency, and I am going to use my executive power to do all these different things. Does he have the ability to do that? Do we have some way of stopping him other than just waiting for the next election? Because based on the precedent that's being set now, the answer is no. Apparently, we don't have that. We just have to do whatever they tell us because it's an emergency. And I think that that's the part of all of this that really bothers me the most, is the uncertainty of it. We can't even evaluate whether this meets the standard because there is no standard.
Right.
So I want a standard. That's what I want. And then we can evaluate whether it's a good standard or a bad standard and whether this meets it or not. But we don't even have it.
Well, yeah. And like just because of the political nature of the country, there's only an incentive for politicians to take this more serious than the other politician, right? So, like, don't go on Twitter. It's a cesspool. But just the idea that Trump is saying that, like, we want to reopen the country slowly over the next couple of weeks has just rattled off a ton of trending hashtags of, like, death for the Dow, die for the economy. Like, that's what they're accusing anybody of that is advocating for the return to normalcy. That we're going to throw all these people into the fire just so we could have, our bank accounts rest a little bit easier.
Right.
It's absolute insanity.
Well, and just think of the flu itself, the regular flu. Some years it's way worse than other years. Some years it's twice as bad as other years. So what if we have some model that comes out that says, you know what, the flu this year is going to be really bad. And it's going to be 80,000 people dead from the flu instead of 60,000 people or something. Is that a justification for shutting down everything? Why? Why not? I mean, how do we know? What's the decision? Who makes the choice? All of these things are like, nobody knows. Nobody knows the answer to any of these questions. Where is the line? I mean, that's the key. That's the key thing. I mean, we need to know where that line is.
Right. Yeah. So Michigan isn't the only state that's kind of going crazy with their restrictions. And yeah, their restrictions are pretty crazy. They're banning the sale of just non-essential items. So there could be a store that's open, but you can only buy specific items from those stores.
They're not letting farmers plant. She literally said, we're locking down on planting. It's just like, lady, you're in a tractor cab in the middle of a field. If that's not social distancing, I don't know what is.
Yeah. And if you really want to, like, start worrying about food drying up. Yeah, start preventing farmers from growing food.
She's like,
Terrible idea.
well, there's snow on the ground.
That's
Illegal
right.
pea is going to get 30 inches, so it's not even that big a deal. It's like,
No. See, it is a big deal. It is a big deal because you don't get to say that. You don't get to just decree nobody gets to plant until June, so that there's no crops at all. You don't get to do that as governor. Sorry.
Also banning just going to like a friend's or family's house. That's not inside your own personal household. That's banned.
See, but the thing is, like, I understand the
maybe
argument.
she just doesn't have any friends, and it's not a big deal for her.
Well, that's probably true, but I actually think you could make an argument that she does have the ability to do that. I mean, show me the law. There are laws in Michigan that say the governor and they define what the state of emergency is, say that they give her pretty broad sweeping powers as to what she can do in an emergency. They're temporary powers, but what constitutional provision says that you have a right to, plant in your field if the governor declares a national emergency or a state emergency and says that you can't? I actually think that the Constitution gives very broad powers to states in these kinds of situations.
Well,
I don't see anything that denies that they have the ability to do this.
I'm sure it does. But if you're caught going and visiting a friend that's not in like medical need, you're looking at like $1,000 fine. Last week, New York increased their fine for non-essential travel from $500 to $1,000. Chicago mayor shutting down parks and threatening harsh punishments for people going outside for non-essential purposes. She's actually become a meme. It's pretty funny. There's pictures of like her showing up in your back seat if if you're going just for a drive. In Illinois, they've restricted. I'm sure this is the case in a lot of states, but they've restricted fishing in Illinois. We've seen stories about people getting arrested for playing catch outside, paddleboarding out in the middle of the ocean, or going to church, as Jim mentioned earlier.
That wasn't in Michigan, by the way. I think they've made an exemption in Michigan.
Wasn't that Kentucky?
I think so. I think there was a case in Mississippi or something.
There was a case in Louisville. Yeah,
Louisville.
It's just these cases, are popping up all over the place. And so, Jim, I mean, is this authoritarianism or is it just tough love? They're doing what's best for you.
What a softball question!
Wow, I don't know.
All right, fine. Moving on.
It's really hard.
No,
this is really
I got a better
hard-hitting question,
for you.
Donald. Jeez.
I got a better question for you because I think that this type of crazy rhetoric that's coming from the government, right, state governments for the most part, is causing people in our own localities, in our own neighborhoods, to flip out. I don't know about you guys, but I've got I'm on a couple of different Facebook groups that are like specific to the little townships or villages that I'm around, just to see what's kind of going around me. And the amount of like tattling and like we're going to report businesses that shouldn't be open and we're going to call the police on you if we see multiple cars out in front of your house is unbelievable. So, Jim, have you seen this type of stuff around you?
I haven't seen a lot of that. I live in a community that has its own, basically a private lake, and I've seen people out there fishing, and I haven't seen the cops come by to bother them, and it seems to be happening day by day. So good for them. But look, we live, as Justin said, maybe a governor does have in an emergency, does have the ability to do some of these things, but we live. It's a pretty delicate social contract that the people have with their government. And I think we're discovering that. A lot of people are discovering that right now. The reason the police go after somebody paddleboarding all by themselves out on the ocean is because they think, oh my God, if somebody sees him doing that, then 2 guys will be out there, then 3, then we'll have 5 guys within 10 feet of each other. And we can't have that because we have to protect public health. So we have to go out there and drag that guy off the ocean, a single guy, just to make sure that other people don't get the idea that they can go out and do things like that. So we have to really crack down. The totalitarian instincts of a lot of these governors is quite shocking to a lot of people. Now, I live in Illinois. I know my governor's totalitarian. And so, you kind of used to it. But what I find interesting, and we're going to talk politics, I'm sure, a little bit later on this show, is that there are a lot of Democratic governors in states that Trump won. And they are making the wrong bet here again by cracking down so hard on their own citizens. While Trump, meanwhile, is talking about getting us back to work and trying to get back to normal. You have Democratic governors of Michigan, of Pennsylvania, of Wisconsin, even of Louisiana, North Carolina. Those are all states that Trump won, and their governor is doing the opposite of what Trump says that we need to do. They are going to be in big trouble, and those states are looking good for Trump again. And then there are states that Trump narrowly lost in 2016 that also have power-hungry Democratic governors like Minnesota and Maine, to a lesser extent, Colorado and Nevada. And so we're seeing here that the social contract that we have, a lot of people thought it was like we basically voluntary, and we follow the law because the law makes sense, and we want to do right by our communities, and we want to do right by our, the public good. But there is a limit to that. And telling people that they can't go fishing all by themselves with nobody within 2 miles of them because somebody might get the wrong idea and go out there and do something else, that's a totalitarian outlook. That is not America. We lock down largely voluntarily, person by person, community by community. And then we see after that, when people just want to go outside and do reasonable things while still being responsible and protective of the public health, they get the cops in their face and they get dragged away. The American people are not going to put up with that for very long. And these Democratic governors are going to discover that very soon.
Yeah. And I think they already are starting to. I mean, we're seeing a recent rash of stories about protests outside various state capitol buildings. Ohio, which I think actually the governor of Ohio said that we're going to reopen May 1st. I think that was a recent headline I saw.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because a group of states, including Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio, all decided that they were going to coordinate their reopening, but none of them have the same reopen date. But I did think it was interesting because I'm pretty sure Indiana has a Republican governor, and I know that Ohio does too. So it is interesting to see that some of this isn't just, liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat.
Yeah, but there's a lot of protests, like I've been saying, Ohio, Oklahoma, Kentucky. There were stories in North Carolina and most popular Michigan. So reading from a New York Post article, it says thousands of protesters on foot and vehicles converged Wednesday on Michigan's Capitol to rally against Governor Gretchen Whitmer's stay-at-home orders in the state. Operation Gridlock, organized by Michigan Conservative Coalition, created a huge bumper-to-bumper traffic jam around the Michigan Capitol building in Lansing. Michon Maddock, an organizer of the group, said the demonstrators included Republicans, Democrats, and independents. Quote, "Quarantine is when you restrict movement of sick people. Tyranny is when you restrict the movement of healthy people. Every person has learned a harsh lesson about social distancing. We don't need a nanny state to tell us how to be careful." So, and this kind of ties into that question I already talked to Isaac about is, if we were all really concerned about the potential of this thing, we're all going to stay inside. I think it's this new, okay, this isn't as bad as 2 million people dying. When can we go back to work? I think that's going to really start to put the stress on these governments to say, yeah, you're right. Stop protesting outside and go back to work.
Well, the thing that just makes me livid is the fact that the governor of Minnesota suspended evictions. And so did the one in Wisconsin. So if I had a tenant that didn't pay rent, I would not be able to go to the courts and say, hey, you know what? I need to start the process on this. And it's a 2-month process anyway. So at least being able to start the process would be great. Right. But it would not be my preferred method of dealing with this to kick somebody out of their house during a time like this. But if I have no recourse, there's going to be a handful of people that abuse that decree. So for me, it's that's a takings. I think I pay my taxes because, I want the court systems to actually work. So I really want the reaction to this, because I think that's going to be the big thing. I think in the meantime, we're just going to have to suck it up and deal with whatever crap comes sliding downhill. But I think really the opportunity is how do we plan for the future if a situation like this arises? And I think that we have opportunities to say things like, look, if you suspend people's property rights, they don't have to pay their property taxes. So right now, the government has no skin in the game in a lot of these municipalities or states. they're just going to say, you better pay up, even though we're not going to let you work. So like, to me, that's the thing. It's a total takings, and we're not talking about it in that way.
Isaac, your boss, John Hinderaker, writes at Powerline, of course. I read that every single day. And he had a post the other day, and he noted how many Minnesotans have died of COVID-19, even with the probably inflated numbers for that, because if you just have it and happen to die of something else, they'll put you down as COVID-19. Do you know how many Minnesotans have died as of yesterday?
Inform us all.
It was 87. And the day before that, it was 79. And the entire increase from 79 to 87 of deaths were all people in nursing homes, obviously very elderly. And so, yeah, your rights as a as a landlord, as a business owner, are being taken away so far because 87 people have died of COVID-19 in your state. So there's your governor, there's your government. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's pretty wild stuff. There was an article from Reason called Michigan's Emergency Stay-at-Home Order is a hot mess. Now 4 sheriffs say they won't be enforcing parts of it. So it talks about how they posted a letter. 4 sheriffs posted a letter on Twitter saying, "We write today to inform the public that our respective counties of our opposition to some of Governor Whitmer's executive orders. While we understand her desire to protect the public, we question some restrictions that she has imposed as overstepping her executive authority." So again, this kind of just goes to like, what are people willing to accept? I think if you go too hard, people are going to say, I don't think I'm going to follow that rule. So yeah, we're going to be seeing this a lot more, especially like New York. Okay. New York was it New Jersey? One of them extended their stay-at-home shelter in place or whatever till like May 15th. Do you know what state that?
Virginia extended until like June something.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, if you look at the projections from that one website that I talked about, they're like down to like 2 deaths by like mid-May. So it's like people are just not going to accept this when they see the numbers being this low. So I think we're going to see a lot more stories like this. It's pretty crazy, but I'm kind of wondering. So if we want to trend into the kind of the politics of all of this stuff, are we too far gone? Like, are we going to be able to get back from this? I'm not talking economically, because I know that that's a whole nother discussion. I'm just talking about like at a societal level. Like, this is being used to promote everything from universal health care, universal basic income. Ilhan Omar said that we need to nationalize the supply chain or whatever. What does that mean? So like,
it means we have too much of stuff and we need less stuff, because that's what would happen.
Yeah, I guess so. Has the dam busted on keeping the policies like this at bay? Because it just seems like,
yeah, it's over.
Like, okay, for example, and I'll let you take it away, Justin, but I was in the car for probably a non-essential reason, and I heard a radio I heard a radio thing talking about how like the government is considering paying for everything that has anything to do with coronavirus in terms of medical bills. And I was just thinking, like, let's say coronavirus is out the door. Like, where is does the justification to pay for anybody's medical stuff, regardless of coronavirus, go out the door too? Because it's not like, it's not your fault that you got coronavirus. It's not your fault you got cancer. Like, the government's going to have the same justification to pay for everything. So yeah, Justin, I mean, it's just getting ready for universal health care. What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, some people are openly calling for it. And if we didn't have a Republican Senate and president, I guarantee we would have it. Yeah. Right now, we would have it. There's no question about it. There'd be no public option. It'd be single payer healthcare. This would be the justification for it. Very recently, I think it was on last Friday, so a week ago, Bernie Sanders and one of the far left members of the House, or so many of them, I can't remember which one, essentially proposed a legislation that would create Medicare for All for as long as COVID-19 is a crisis, and the way that they define that, and it would be for everybody. So the government would pay everybody's healthcare bills, even if you have private health insurance, they would pay for your healthcare bills. And the way they define when the crisis ends is there has to be a vaccine approved by the FDA and widely distributed amongst the population. So you can imagine. I mean, that could be 18 months from now.
That could be never from now. That might never happen.
Right. Well, what does it mean widely distributed? Well, what does that even mean? So this could be 18 months into the future. So if we actually had that, do you really think that if we had single payer healthcare for 18 months, that would somehow then just disappear? They're just going to take away, like, of course not. Of course they would have it. That would be the system. Health insurance companies would go under. They'd get rid of them. I mean, they wouldn't even stick around. They would give up. So, I mean, the whole system would collapse. And that's now just openly being proposed. Like, yeah, absolutely. Let's do this. There are so many things. And why? And by the way, why do we need, I have health insurance. I don't need single payer healthcare. Why would the government pay for my healthcare? Well, I mean, there are so many things right now that have either already happened because of COVID-19 or being proposed that impact people who actually have not lost their jobs as a result of this crisis, that it is just remarkable. The stimulus checks is a great example of this. It's amazing. They gave stimulus checks out to people based on their income from last year, not based on whether they lost their job. So they're giving money to people who didn't get hurt by the crisis. Some people did, but a lot of those people who got checks did not get hurt by it. So they just sent people money who didn't actually lose their jobs. And the idea of calling it a stimulus check is a joke, because the whole idea of a stimulus check is to what? Stimulate the economy. But you shut the economy down. So you sent everybody thousands of dollars who didn't lose their jobs, who can't spend the money anywhere except for Amazon.
Well, they can pay their rent, Justin.
I guess that's true. But what if they already have a job and they're paying their rent anyway? I can understand giving money to people who lost their jobs because you drove their business. You destroyed their business because of this. I understand that. That makes sense to me. But they just gave money to a bunch of people, millions of people who didn't lose their jobs, who are just as well off as they were before. I'm actually spending less money now on a day-to-day basis than I normally do. And I haven't lost my job. So why should I get a stimulus check? That makes no sense. It's completely stupid.
Well, to quote Jim, Justin, check your coronavirus privilege. So
I think that's true of most people, don't you? You said it yourself. You're not going anywhere. You're not doing anything, right? Nobody is, because what the heck are we going to do? There's nothing to do.
Yeah, I went to the grocery store on like Monday. I think it was Monday morning. And I was like, damn, I spent a lot of money at the grocery store, like as I was leaving. And I was thinking, well, I'm not going to spend it on anything else for the next week. So I guess it's not a big deal.
Exactly. So that's the thing, right? So the point I was getting to is, why is it happening? It's not happening to help people or to stimulate the economy. That's a lie. The reason it's happening is to get everybody hooked on getting $1,200 a month from the government. That's the whole point. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. Just give it to people who lost their jobs. Why are you giving it to anyone else?
So let's talk about other kind of terrible precedents that are being set. So there are states that are telling hospitals like what surgeries that they can do and what treatments they can prescribe, because some things are non-essential, right? We need to free up all that space. So just think about that. The government dictating what medical treatments that hospitals can do. Like, what maybe coronavirus is done in a couple of months or whatever. But there's another crisis the next day and another crisis the next day. And if we set this idea, just imagine when the government is in control of all of it. When there's a Medicare for All, we have universal health care. And the precedent's already set that the government can dictate what treatments hospitals can do and what treatments are more important than others. Like, people aren't worried about that. People aren't talking about that.
Which states, do you know which states did that? I haven't heard that.
I would assume New York, just because it's kind of the forefront of all of that.
I was just curious. So I'll look it up afterwards.
Yeah. Go ahead and look that up.
Minnesota's curbed non-essential services. Mayo Clinic is going to lose $1 billion this year because the hospital is empty right now, because they're just waiting for the surge of COVID patients that hasn't come yet. Apparently, we're starting to get them now, and they're expecting these next 2 weeks to be the big ones. But up until this point, we've had, I mean, one of our friends that we play trivia with is a doctor. He's just said, yeah, hospitals are empty right now.
All right. Yeah, it's crazy. And then I'm just thinking again, like we all think that coronavirus is this kind of short-term thing. We just need to get over this hump, and then we're all fine and dandy in the future, right? But like climate change is the next crisis. I mean, that's the thing that they've been trying to sound the alarms on for the last, I don't know, 20 years, 10 years. And then after that, people not making a livable wage is going to be a crisis. People not having a stable job is going to be a crisis. So it's just like the precedent has been set. And I don't know where the bar is. We already talked about this. We don't know what the bar is for what a crisis is, for when the government can come in and do all of these things, give people universal basic income, advocate for universal health care. So I don't know. I mean, Jim, where are we at with this? Is this just destroyed the dam that was holding back all these big government policies?
I'm actually more optimistic about it than Isaac and Justin and you seem to be. I think that
you don't know me.
I think the models that predicted all of this surge in our hospitals were wrong. They were overestimating the crisis by a factor of 4 or 5 times. That is not something people are going to forget. People are going to remember that they were put on house arrest and lost their job, and their wife lost her job, and their kids were basically lost a whole half year of school, and college kids who basically just a wasted year for their college life. People are going to remember this, and they're going to remember that the estimates for this were wildly exaggerated. And I think that's going to make them less susceptible to these kinds of scare tactics that are always used to increase the power of government and reduce the power of the individual to make their own choices for their lives. I think that the social contract is something people are going to be talking and thinking about a lot more these days, and they are going to remember, and they are not going to be open to these sorts of things. I think the whole climate scare thing is done. All you have to do is say, hey, did you enjoy being under house arrest for 3 months during COVID-19? How about doing that for the rest of your life? Because that's what's going to be necessary. The way the eco-left says we have to save the planet. And of course, all the models they've used to say that we have to save the planet have been horribly wrong for the last 20 years. It's the easiest argument ever to make to stop that kind of nonsense from happening. And I really do believe, I have more faith in the American people to smell BS and walk away from it than maybe you guys do.
Yeah, well, I 2 things to that. One is you're already seeing kind of the politicians on the left trying to use this type of crisis as justification for all of those things. We're not making that up, right? They are trying it. There was a quote from Biden, which if you cut out all the ums and ums and all of that, he was trying to make a connection to what we have in kind of the face of coronavirus. To basically, we need to replicate that to take on to climate change. So that stuff is going to be pushed for. I think that our job here is to make people aware that this push is going to come so that they're ready to fight back against it. There's a lot of good stuff in that book that's behind Justin over there that just came out that he and I might have had something to do with. But yeah, I mean, these calls for socialism are coming, and we need to be able to argue against them. So we're not doing video, Justin. So you're holding up the book.
I'm just showing it to them so that they can see it. It's called Arguing with Socialists. It came out on April 7th.
Oh, cool. Justin has a new coloring book. It's at your reading level.
Thanks. Yeah, actually, it is at my reading level. It's at your reading level too. It's at everyone's reading level. Order now on Amazon and everywhere books are sold.
That's a non-essential item, and it will not get 2-day shipping.
Yeah, nobody in Michigan has one because. All right, gentlemen. I think that's all the coronavirus talk I can do. We still have a few minutes. Good. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
I just wanted to thank Mike for writing us so that we had something to talk about for the last 45 minutes. That's great.
Good point. That's a good point.
What happened to the Joe Biden clip? Are we not playing that?
Oh, do you want to do that?
I absolutely want to play that. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to hear your next president of the United States, potentially. And see what we're all in for. Because, and just keep in mind, as you listen to this clip, that it's only going to get worse as the years go by if he actually becomes president. So just keep in mind, this is Joe Biden on CNN with some guy in Anderson Cooper. Who's the guy in the middle? Do we know?
No idea.
All right.
All right.
Jim, do you know who that is? You're an old time media guy. Who's the guy in the middle?
Looks vaguely familiar, but I'm not going to try to.
All right. We don't know who he is. Doesn't matter. He doesn't talk. Go ahead. Let's play the clip.
Kinds of things that have to be done. There's during World War II, where Roosevelt came up with a thing that was totally different than he called it the World War II. He had the War Production Board.
Anyone?
Yikes!
Anyone?
Oh my gosh!
Right, that's painful.
So we've come to the decision on this podcast several weeks ago that we're not like making fun of him. Okay, like this is a very serious problem that we've all had family members that are currently suffering with this or have suffered from this in the past. But yeah, it's just kind of crazy. It's really sad. At first, I just kind of looked at it like, oh, this is you would hear clips of it every once in a while, and I would think, you know what, like there are a lot of people out there who are just super pro-Trump people, and they get wrapped up in this, and they're taking it a little too far, and they say that he's lost it and whatever. But then the more you listen to him talk like this, the more it's like, I'm not saying he has dementia or anything like that, but I am saying that he's clearly lost a step here without question. At minimum, that's what's happened. He is not sharp. I mean, there's just no question about how can anybody say we've heard this guy talk for decades and decades and decades. It's not like we've never heard him before, and this is the way he's always been. I mean, he's clearly not the same as he was even during the Obama years, and he was never great at this kind of stuff. So it's really bad. Jason Sudeikis does like an impression of him or whatever on SNL. And they had like one of their more recent episodes. They had like one of the debates, and he was doing like his shtick as Joe Biden. And I turned to my wife and I was like, man, could you imagine if Joe Biden was that coherent? Like, it's so much.
Can you imagine if Joe Biden was a Republican, and then the skit would be, he doesn't have it, he's not all there, and they'd be mocking him for all of the stumbling around. Of course, they're not going to do that because he's a Democrat and they want him to win. But it is, how can anybody support this guy? I'm not even talking about against Trump. Forget about that. I'm just saying, how could any Democrat, like out of all the people that you could have chosen from, you chose the guy who can't even really speak, loses his train of thought all the time. He's clearly not there. And yet that's your choice. That's the best person you could find in the whole Democratic Party. Really? That's the best one? It's really sad.
As short a time ago as just the debates a few months ago, or even a year ago, Joe Biden wasn't nearly this bad. This is a rapid decline in his ability to speak, to put two sentences together, to do a friendly interview. He's looking, our viewers or our listeners can't see this, but he's looking down at note cards, and he still can't get it out.
Right.
It's this person cannot be president of the United States. I don't know how you vote for a guy who can't get through an interview with Anderson Cooper, and Anderson's just sitting there patiently waiting for him to spit it out, and then it ends up being this completely incoherent, random word salad. It's just, this guy is the Democratic nominee for president. It is sad.
20 seconds straight of just nonsense. It doesn't even make sense. Like, you would think someone who is even partially there, after 7, 8, 9 seconds of it, you just move on to something else. You just shift it. You can't remember what it is you're talking about, so you just go to something else. But he couldn't even do that. And he took, as Jim said, I mean, you can't see the video clip, but if you watch the video clip, he very clearly looks down. He's clearly looking at his notes. And then he looks up and he's still like stumbling around. It's really sad. I mean, it's sad. It's sad to watch. It makes me uncomfortable to listen to the clip.
Right.
Ugh.
Yeah. Then there's so many of them too. Man, there's so many of them.
There are.
There was another one where he's talking about like this heart-wrenching story of like a hospital worker that got coronavirus, and now he's got to be in this room that's like outside of where his kids are. And he's talking about like how he should how the hospital worker should come up with a knocking game that he had when he couldn't go buy his kids. And it was just like, what, you have polio? Like, why couldn't you be by your kids? Like, what are you talking about?
But the last time they had this, I think he was talking about the Spanish flu in 1918 or whatever.
Right.
I mean, what
college?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, what is he talking? He's so confused. And the funny thing is, this is just the sad stuff that we're talking about. We're not even talking about all the creepy, weird stuff that he said and done. That's like a whole other different topic. Like, if you haven't heard the clip of him, audience, if you haven't heard the clip of him talking about kids at the pool, I urge you, stop what you're doing right now. Type into Google Joe Biden kids at pool video and listen to him talk about that. Because if you can still vote for him after watching that, then I don't know who you are. Because my God, that is the most uncomfortable video I have ever seen in my life. I think it is that bad.
Yeah, I love kids sitting on my lap. That's he just ends with that.
He talks about leg hair. He talks about his leg hair in there.
And
it is the most bizarre. It is the most bizarre clip I have ever heard. It is so creepy.
Yeah.
See, the fun thing about Joe Biden is he would tell these bizarre stories, but he could tell the story. He could get it out. I bet he couldn't repeat the stories he used to tell about being a lifeguard and having the kids rub his leg hair. Ugh.
Beating up Corn Pop.
And his buddy Corn Pop in the gang or whatever the heck was going on. I mean, he used to be able to tell these weird stories, and then you would just marvel at how weird they are. And Joe thinks it's cool. He can't even get them out now. I mean, I'd love to have someone ask him to tell a story, tell one of the stories that he's told on the stump for decades. He wouldn't be able to get it out anymore because he's just incoherent.
No.
Hey, Joe, tell us the leg hair story again. Can you do that?
And then people like Anderson Cooper just sit there and pretend like this is normal. You've got like the New York Times that are editing stories to be more in his favor. They just decide that this is their best chance of getting Orange Man Bad out of office. So
also, just a reminder to everyone, Donald Trump is mentally unfit to be president of the United States. Remember that? Remember that one?
Remember that? They're not going to bring that up this time.
No.
Definitely not. All right, audience, that's it. We're already going long here. Thank you all for tuning in for this episode of In the Tank. Please tune in every Friday for a new episode. You can find us on everything, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play. Write a review for us on iTunes. It'd be greatly appreciated. Find us on YouTube even. If you'd like, you can follow us on Twitter at In the Tank Pod. If you have any comments, suggestions, questions, feel free to email us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook and Twitter. Look for the big, beautiful, still blue check mark. It's there. You can find me.
Isaac Orr, same question.
The fracking guy on Twitter.
Fantastic. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At J Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and also heartland.org.
Thank you all for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week.